30,000 feet in the air, the first-class cabin was perfectly, luxuriously silent. Suddenly, a middle-aged woman began to gasp for air. Her crystal wine glass slipped, shattering on the plush carpet. A flight attendant rushed over, her voice trembling over the PA system. "Is there a doctor on board? We have a medical emergency." Nobody stood up. The wealthy passengers froze in panic. Back in economy, in seat 18C, a single dad was quietly tying his young son's shoe. He looked up at the speaker. He wasn't a doctor, but he stood up and walked toward the front of the plane. His name was Ethan Cole, 42 years old with broad shoulders, a warm, reassuring smile, and the kind of infinite, quiet patience that only a single parent truly understands. He wasn't a corporate executive. He wasn't a Wall Street banker flying to a high-stakes merger. He was a middle school physical education teacher and the head coach of the local track team. Sitting tightly next to him, clutching the armrests until his small knuckles turned white, was his 9-year-old son, Noah. Noah was absolutely terrified of flying. Every slight bump of turbulence, every change in engine pitch, sent a jolt of anxiety through the young boy. Ethan spent the first 2 hours of the cross-country flight doing what he did best: coaching. He distracted Noah with comic books, explained how aerodynamics worked in simple terms, and gently rubbed his son's back, acting as a human shock absorber against the boy's fears. He used the exact same breathing techniques he taught his track athletes before a major relay race. "In through the nose, out through the mouth, buddy," Ethan murmured, his large hand completely enveloping Noah's small, trembling fingers. "Just like we're at the starting line. You control the pace, not the plane." Ethan was an intensely practical man. He lived his life on a tight public school teacher's budget, clipping coupons and picking up extra weekend shifts to afford Noah's track spikes. But he possessed something far more valuable than a heavy bank account. Due to his job as a head sports coach, Ethan held active, highly updated certifications in advanced first aid, CPR, and emergency sports trauma management. He wasn't a medical professional, and he couldn't perform surgery, but he had been rigorously trained to remain entirely calm when the human body suddenly stopped working the way it was supposed to. Far away from the cramped seats of economy, sitting in the sprawling, ultra-exclusive first-class cabin, was Margaret Hale. Margaret was 55 years old and a titan of industry. She was a fiercely intelligent, widely feared, and highly respected venture capitalist. She was currently en route to a massive global economic summit where her keynote speech would likely dictate market trends for the next quarter. She was a woman who controlled billions of dollars, thousands of employees, and her own incredibly rigid schedule. But at 30,000 feet, in a pressurized metal tube flying at 600 miles per hour, all the money and influence in the world cannot change human biology. About 20 minutes earlier, the first-class flight attendant had served a beautifully plated gourmet lunch. It was an intricate pasta dish featuring a highly specialized, exotic brand of imported sauce. Margaret took a few polite bites while reviewing financial spreadsheets on her laptop. She didn't realize the sauce contained a highly concentrated microscopic trace of a specific shellfish extract. Margaret had a mild, historically manageable allergy to shellfish. But as she aged, allergies can unpredictably, violently shift from a minor annoyance to a massive systemic shock. 20 minutes after the meal was cleared, it began. It started as a slight itch on the back of her neck. Then a sudden, terrifying heat flushed across her chest and face. Margaret loosened the silk scarf around her neck, frowning, trying to take a deep breath. The breath didn't come. Her airway was beginning to aggressively, rapidly constrict. Red hives erupted violently along her jawline. She dropped her pen. Her hands began to shake. She reached for the call button, but her vision blurred, and her crystal water glass tipped over, crashing silently into the thick carpet. The lead flight attendant, a seasoned professional named Sarah, saw her immediately and rushed over. "Ma'am, Ms. Hale, are you okay?" Margaret couldn't speak. She could only gasp, a terrifying, high-pitched, wheezing sound escaping her tightening throat. Her lips were rapidly turning a pale, dangerous shade of blue. Sarah grabbed the intercom, her professional training failing to hide the absolute terror in her voice. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a critical medical emergency in the forward cabin. If there is a licensed physician, a nurse, or a medical professional on board, please ring your call button immediately. In the first-class cabin, wealthy CEOs and tech founders looked around nervously, entirely helpless. In business class, people whispered and craned their necks. There was no doctor on the flight. There was no nurse. There was only a terrifying, empty silence. Back in seat 18C, Ethan Cole heard the announcement. He felt the distinct, undeniable shift in the cabin's energy. He looked down at Noah, who was looking up at him with wide, frightened eyes. Ethan didn't hesitate. He didn't wait to see if someone more qualified would step up. He leaned down and looked his son dead in the eye. Noah, I need you to be incredibly brave for me for just a few minutes. I have to go help someone. I will be right back, I promise. Ethan stood up, squeezed past his seatmate, and began moving swiftly up the aisle. Ethan moved with the heavy, deliberate, unpanicked stride of a man used to running onto a football field when a kid goes down hard. He pushed aside the thin curtain separating economy from the forward cabins. When he reached first class, the scene was chaotic. The lead flight attendant, Sarah, was kneeling next to Margaret's wide, reclining seat, holding an oxygen mask to the billionaire's face. But it wasn't working. Margaret's eyes were wide with pure, primal panic. She was suffocating. I'm not a doctor, Ethan said loudly, his deep, authoritative coach's voice instantly cutting through the panic in the cabin. But I am a certified first responder and an athletic coach. I know emergency protocol. Tell me exactly what is happening. Sarah looked up, her eyes wide with desperate relief. She can't breathe. It started right after the meal service. She has hives on her neck. I think it's anaphylaxis. Ethan immediately dropped to one knee beside the billionaire. He didn't look at her expensive jewelry or the VIP status on her ticket. He looked at her airway. He looked at the blue tint on her lips. She was conscious but fading fast. Ma'am, my name is Ethan. I am here to help you, Ethan said, his voice incredibly calm, grounding her frantic energy. Are you highly allergic to something you just ate? Blink once for yes. Margaret blinked hard. Do you have an EpiPen in your purse or carry-on? Ethan asked urgently. Margaret shook her head weakly. She didn't carry one. She had never had a reaction this severe in her entire life. Ethan turned his head sharply to the flight attendant. Do you have the heavy emergency medical kit? The EMK? Yes, it's right here, Sarah said, dragging a heavy locked red box down the aisle. Aviation regulations are incredibly strict. Flight attendants are generally not legally permitted to administer injectable drugs or break the seal on the advanced medical kit without direct, explicit authorization from a licensed medical professional, either on board or on the ground. Ethan knew this. He didn't play the cowboy. He didn't rip the box open and blindly stab a needle into her leg like a dramatic movie scene. He operated on strict, disciplined protocol. You need to call the cockpit immediately, Ethan ordered the flight attendant, his voice leaving absolutely zero room for debate. Have the captain patch us through to Medair or your ground-based medical advisory team. Right now. Tell them we have a suspected severe anaphylactic shock and we are requesting immediate authorization to deploy the onboard epinephrine autoinjector. Sarah nodded frantically, grabbing the wall-mounted interphone and dialing the flight deck. While she communicated, Ethan turned his full attention back to Margaret. The wealthy passengers around them were staring in stunned silence. Some were holding their phones. Ethan ignored them completely. He took Margaret's trembling, cold hand in his own warm, calloused one. Look right at me, Margaret, Ethan instructed softly but firmly, forcing her to focus on his eyes rather than her closing throat. You are going to be okay. The medicine is right here. We are just getting the official green light. I want you to try and slow your breathing. Do not fight it. Look at me. He utilized the exact same calming techniques he used when a 12-year-old kid broke an ankle on the track. Pure, steady, unyielding reassurance. 30 seconds later, Sarah rushed back from the phone. The ground doctor has authorized it. They gave us the code to break the lock. Open it, Ethan said. Sarah snapped the seal on the red box and pulled out a standard, pre-filled epinephrine auto-injector. She handed it to Ethan, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped it. "I've got it," Ethan said steadily. He didn't hesitate. He knew the exact placement. He took the device, firmly gripped Margaret's outer thigh, and pressed the injector firmly against the fabric of her designer trousers until the mechanism clicked. He held it there for 10 agonizing, heavy seconds, counting out loud so the ground doctor could hear over the headset Sarah was holding. 1, 2, 3. When he pulled it away, he immediately began to gently massage the injection site to help the adrenaline enter her bloodstream faster. The entire first-class cabin held its collective breath. The silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of the jet engines. For a terrifying minute, nothing happened. And then, the miracle of modern medicine took hold. Margaret's chest heaved. A sharp, loud, jagged gasp of air filled her lungs. The terrible high-pitched wheezing began to dramatically loosen. The terrifying blue tint on her lips slowly began to recede, replaced by a flush of returning oxygen. It was a visceral, violent return to life. The heavy, suffocating, invisible grip around her throat instantly shattered. The wealthy passengers, who moments ago were bracing for a mid-air tragedy, collectively exhaled. A few actually had to look away, overwhelmed by the raw, unpolished reality of human survival unfolding right on their custom-tailored carpet. She slumped back against the leather seat, absolutely exhausted, but breathing. She was breathing. Ethan didn't cheer. He didn't stand up and take a bow. He stayed right there on his knees. He grabbed the blood pressure cuff from the medical kit and strapped it to her arm, monitoring her vitals. "Her airway is opening up," Ethan reported calmly to Sarah, who relayed the information to the ground doctor. "Pulse is rapid but stabilizing. The epinephrine is working. Shunanon." The ground doctor advised that a sudden diversion was no longer medically necessary if she remained stable, as they were only 45 minutes from their scheduled destination, which had a massive trauma center. Ethan stayed kneeling beside her for the next 20 minutes, quietly monitoring her breathing, offering her small sips of water when she could finally swallow. There was no dramatic resuscitation. There was no Hollywood explosion. There was just a calm, trained, practical man doing exactly what needed to be done in the most critical minutes of a woman's life. And the entire VIP cabin watched him in absolute humbled awe. If you believe that simple, practical first aid knowledge can make a far bigger difference in a crisis than a fancy title or a massive bank account, hit that subscribe button to witness exactly what happens when the billionaire finally catches her breath. As the heavy dose of adrenaline coursed through her system, fighting off the allergic reaction, Margaret Hale slowly regained her senses. The terrifying fog of suffocation lifted, leaving her deeply fatigued but incredibly lucid. She turned her head against the soft headrest and looked at the man kneeling in the aisle beside her. He was still holding her wrist, lightly monitoring her radial pulse with 2 fingers. Margaret had spent her entire life surrounded by the world's most powerful men. Wall Street sharks, aggressive corporate litigators, politicians. They were men who always wanted something from her. They wanted her money, her influence, her endorsement. But the man looking down at her right now wanted absolutely nothing. She realized he wasn't looking at her as Margaret Hale, the untouchable titan of venture capital. He was looking at her simply as a fragile human being who had needed a hand in the dark. In her cutthroat, heavily insulated corporate ecosystem, that kind of pure, agenda-free compassion was rarer than diamonds. "You," Margaret whispered, her voice incredibly hoarse, painful, and weak. "You are the doctor?" Ethan offered a gentle, self-deprecating smile. He shook his head slowly. "No, ma'am," Ethan replied quietly, keeping his voice low so as not to disturb the quiet cabin. "I'm not a doctor. I'm just a middle school track coach. I teach PE, but they make us renew our advanced first aid and EpiPen certifications every year." "Looks like it finally paid off." Margaret stared at him, her sharp, calculating mind processing this information. The man who had just smoothly, confidently saved her life Coordinating with ground control and keeping her from panicking into a cardiac event was a school teacher. She looked at his clothes. He was wearing a simple, faded athletic polo shirt and a well-worn watch. "Thank you," Margaret whispered, a single, genuine tear slipping down her cheek. It was a rare display of vulnerability for the iron-willed CEO. "Thank you for not walking away when everyone else just stared." "I couldn't just sit there," Ethan said simply, as if saving a life was as normal as tying a shoe. "You're going to be perfectly fine. The paramedics will be waiting for us at the gate." A wealthy passenger sitting across the aisle, a man who had previously been complaining about the Wi-Fi speed, leaned over, looking at Ethan with profound respect. "That was incredible, sir," the passenger whispered. "The way you took control. Do you work in emergency management?" "No," Ethan replied politely, pulling back slightly from the unwanted attention. "I just teach kids how to run hurdles. That's all." He didn't use the moment to brag. He didn't mention that he was a struggling single dad. He didn't mention the agonizing stress of trying to afford his son's upcoming sports camp. He just did his job, and now he wanted to fade back into the background. Margaret, feeling slightly stronger, gestured weakly to the lead flight attendant. "Sarah," Margaret whispered, "please, clear the empty seat next to me. The first-class suite. Let him sit here for the rest of the flight. Give him whatever he wants." It was the ultimate airline gesture. An instant, free upgrade to a seat that cost thousands of dollars. Champagne, caviar, luxury. Sarah immediately smiled and turned to Ethan. "Sir, please, take the seat. You've earned it. Let us take care of you." Ethan looked at the massive, incredibly comfortable leather reclining suite. He looked at the complimentary amenities kit and the massive entertainment screen. It looked like absolute heaven for a tired, overworked single dad. But Ethan didn't even hesitate. He shook his head gently and stood up. "I appreciate the offer, Mrs. Hale. Truly I do." "It's a beautiful seat," Ethan said, his voice full of genuine gratitude. "But I have a 9-year-old boy sitting back in row 18. He's terrified of flying, and I promised him I'd be right back. He needs his dad." Margaret Hale's eyes widened slightly. She was a woman who routinely offered people massive incentives, and they always, without fail, took them. This man had just rejected ultimate luxury simply to go hold his son's hand in a cramped economy seat. "I understand," Margaret said softly, her respect for this stranger multiplying exponentially. "Go to your son." Ethan nodded. He gave the flight attendant a final few instructions on monitoring her breathing, and then he turned around. As Ethan Cole walked back down the aisle, passing through the business class curtain and into the tight, cramped rows of economy, there was no dramatic slow-motion applause. Nobody stood up and cheered. But there was a profound, heavy, incredibly tangible shift in the atmosphere. The passengers who had watched the drama unfold looked at him differently. They moved their knees to give him more room in the aisle. They offered quiet, respectful nods. He wasn't a celebrity. He wasn't a billionaire. He was just a dad. And in that metal tube, he was the most respected man in the sky. He slipped back into seat 18C. Noah looked up, tears still brimming in his eyes. "Dad, you took a long time," Noah sniffled. "Did you fix the emergency?" Ethan smiled, wrapping a strong arm around his son's shoulders, pulling him close. "Yeah, buddy," Ethan whispered, grabbing the comic book. "I helped a lady feel better. Now, where were we? Batman was just about to fight the Joker, right?" 45 minutes later, the massive jet touched down smoothly on the runway. The heavy thrust reversers engaged, and the plane taxied quickly to the gate. The captain had declared a medical priority. The moment the seatbelt sign chimed off, the main cabin doors were thrown open, and a team of airport paramedics carrying heavy medical gear rushed on board. They immediately attended to Margaret, loading her onto a specialized transport chair to rush her to the waiting ambulance for observation and a secondary dose of medication. The rest of the passengers were instructed to remain seated until the medical team cleared the aisle. As the paramedics carefully wheeled Margaret toward the front exit, she suddenly held up her hand, signaling them to stop. "Wait," Margaret commanded, her voice raspy but regaining its usual authoritative steel. "Stop right here." The paramedics paused right next to row 18. Margaret looked past the medical equipment and locked eyes with Ethan, who was helping Noah put on his backpack. "Ethan," Margaret said. Ethan looked up. "Ms. Hale, how are you feeling?" "Much better, thanks to you," she said. She looked at the young boy standing next to him. "And this must be the son who was more important than a first-class suite." Ethan smiled, pulling Noah closer. "This is Noah." Margaret looked at the boy, noting his worn-out sneakers and the faded sports logo on his backpack. She had an eye for details. She had built her empire on noticing things other people missed. She saw the love between them, but she also saw the quiet, undeniable signs of financial struggle. "Noah," Margaret said gently to the boy, "your dad is a very brave man today." She turned back to Ethan. She didn't pull out a massive checkbook. She didn't offer to buy him a car or hand him a stack of cash. Margaret Hale was far too intelligent and far too classy for something so vulgar and transactional. She knew a man with Ethan's immense pride would instantly reject a cash handout. "You said you were a track coach?" Margaret asked quickly. "Yes, ma'am, at Lincoln Middle School." "And does Noah run?" "He wants to." Ethan smiled softly. "He's hoping to get into the elite summer training program next month. We're working on his times." Margaret simply nodded. She didn't say another word. She signaled the paramedics, and they wheeled her off the plane. Ethan didn't think anything of the interaction. He grabbed their bags, walked off the plane, and returned to his normal, quiet, exhausting life. The incident at 30,000 feet became just a wild story he told his coworkers in the teacher's lounge. He didn't ask the airline for compensation. He didn't seek out the media. A few days passed. Life went back to grading papers and coaching kids on a dirt track. Then on a quiet Tuesday morning, the principal of Lincoln Middle School called a sudden emergency staff meeting. Ethan sat in the back of the room, grading quizzes. The principal stood at the podium, looking completely shell-shocked, holding a piece of heavy watermarked parchment paper. "I don't know how to announce this," the principal stammered, adjusting his glasses, "but our school, our athletic department, has just received an anonymous, private philanthropic grant." The teachers murmured, expecting a few $1,000s for new basketballs. "The grant," the principal continued, his voice shaking, "is for $250,000. It is completely unrestricted, designated exclusively for the renovation of the track field, new uniforms, and full-ride scholarships for our underprivileged athletes to attend any summer training camp in the country." The room erupted in gasps. Ethan froze. His pen stopped moving. The principal looked up, scanning the room. "The donor demands strict anonymity, but the legal trust attached a single, specific stipulation to the funds." The principal looked directly at the back of the room. "The entire fund must be managed and independently overseen by our head coach." Ethan Cole. Ethan's heart stopped. Nobody in the room knew about the airplane. Nobody knew about the billionaire. They just thought Ethan was incredibly lucky. But Ethan knew. A month later, the world had changed. The dirt track at Lincoln Middle School was being torn up, replaced by a state-of-the-art, rubberized Olympic-grade surface. The kids were wearing brand-new high-end running shoes. And Noah had received a fully paid premium scholarship to the most elite, advanced summer track program in the state. One evening, Ethan was checking his mail at his small apartment. Among the bills and junk mail was a thick, heavy envelope made of expensive cream paper. He opened it carefully. Inside was a single handwritten letter. The handwriting was elegant, sharp, and completely authoritative. "Ethan, I am told your new track is coming along beautifully. I expect Noah to break some records this summer. I have spent my entire life evaluating investments. I look at balance sheets, profit margins, and ROI. I am surrounded by people who constantly ask me for things, who only see me as a bank account. At 30,000 feet, when I was completely vulnerable and terrified, you didn't ask who I was. You didn't care about my net worth. You didn't care about a reward. You simply saw a human being in distress, and you stepped forward when everyone else stepped back. And when I offered you a taste of luxury, you chose your son instead. You cannot put a price tag on that kind of integrity. So I didn't try. I am stepping down from my primary corporate board next year to focus on a new national educational charity foundation. I need people on my board who understand what real leadership looks like. People who know how to stay calm when the world is crashing down. I have enclosed an official invitation to join the board of directors. The position is fully compensated, and you can dial in from your living room. You don't have to quit teaching. In fact, I forbid you from quitting. We need more coaches like you in the world. With profound gratitude, Margaret Hale. Ethan stared at the letter, his eyes blurring with sudden tears. The sheer astronomical scale of her generosity was breathtaking. She hadn't just written a check to ease her conscience. She had actively weaponized her immense wealth to systematically destroy the financial barriers holding his students back. She had leveled the playing field for kids who had never even seen a real starting block. The cabin on that flight hadn't witnessed a dramatic exchange of money. They hadn't witnessed a Hollywood movie scene. They had witnessed pure, unfiltered human dignity. The most shocking thing about that day wasn't that an ordinary single dad had saved the life of a powerful billionaire. The truly shocking thing was that the billionaire had recognized his true worth, not by writing him a quiet, insulting check, but by using her massive influence to completely change the trajectory of his entire community, giving hundreds of kids a chance to run. Ethan carefully folded the letter, placed it on his kitchen counter, and walked into the living room to help his son pack his new gym bag. If you firmly believe that doing the absolute right thing, without ever expecting a reward, is the most powerful force in the world, hit that subscribe button to follow more stories of quiet integrity winning in the end. Tell us in the comments down below. Have you ever taken a basic first aid or CPR class? If you haven't, does this story make you want to learn?